I think we are pretty good to go. I've got everybody out of the chat for the moment, and I'm sure we'll have folks joining us in process. But once again, welcome to the pre-application workshop this afternoon. I'm Ron Achelpoll. I'm the Director of Transportation and Environment for the Mid-America Regional Council. Really pleased to be, again, a process that we do every couple of years here at MARC in our role as the Metropolitan Planning Organization to help prioritize and distribute federal funds for surface transportation projects in the region. And we've issued a call for the funding that we're anticipating in fiscal years 2025 and 2026. We sent that call around last week, and the pre-application, the first phase of the process, pre-applications will be due April 1st. And so today we wanted to focus on that part of the process, although we'll also have some information about the technical application process that'll be happening later on in the spring and early summer. There'll be several of us on the staff that will be presenting information for you today. And so I'll introduce them. Martin Riverola is going to give us an overview of the programming process and the pre-application assessment process and the Connect to KC plan overview. Mark Hansen will also provide information about that, and then Chris Upchurch will give us a preview of the application portal and how that works. It's a slight modification from the process we used a couple of years ago. So with that, I really appreciate everybody's time and attention. Once again, if you have questions as we go, please go ahead and enter those in the chat, and we'll try to address them as we go along here. So I'll turn the floor over to Martin, I believe, to cover the next section of the presentation.
Actually, Ron, this is Mark Hansen. I'll be taking the first section here. So
my apologies.
Not a problem. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in our pre-application workshop. Next slide, please. Wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we have going on, and some anticipated funding levels are always a good place to start with that. We did received some late notice yesterday afternoon that Federal Highway had actually published some information about federal fiscal year 2022. We had been anticipating a rise in our amounts available for programming, and we did see some increases in programs. So the one that we did not make any change to at this point is the CMAQ program. Those funds are not directly suballocated to MARC, and so we're still waiting for our partners at KDOT and MoDOT to kind of break that out for us and determine how much funding we'll have available to us. But in normal years, or in years past, we see about $5.6 million over the 2-year period for CMAQ in Kansas, and about $6.2 million in Missouri. Again, we expect those numbers to rise, although we don't know by how much, but as soon as we are able to give you a number on those, we will make sure that folks are aware of that new programming target. The next one is our Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which is our largest and most flexible. We've seen a rise of about $2 million per year in Kansas, and about $2.5 million a year in Missouri over what we had previously talked about. And so we're up to about $29.6 million in Kansas over 2 years, and $52.2 million in Missouri over the 2-year program. The Transportation Alternatives is the third program. This one saw probably the largest increase. We anticipated that due to changes in our new infrastructure bill that significantly increased funding for that program. So we're anticipating about $4.4 million in Kansas over 2 years, and about $5.8 million in Missouri. All told, just under $40 million in Kansas, and just over $64 million in Missouri. Again, these numbers are still somewhat preliminary, and we anticipate there may be changes to them. So we'll operate now as these are our programming targets, but these are very much still remain subject to change. The next slide. When it comes to our Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, some things, program Operation Greenlight, some funding for that. The operation of that program gets taken kind of off the top. They don't compete for those funds. Both STP committees in Kansas and Missouri have agreed to supplement funding for Operation Greenlight. And so you can see how much is taken off of the top there for Operation Greenlight, $500,000 in Kansas, $1.2 million in Missouri. That reduces down our programming targets a little bit to just over 29 million in Kansas and $51 million in Missouri. Next slide. For CMAQ, it's a little bit different. Some of you who are familiar with CMAQ here at Mid-America Regional Council know that we break out the funding pot into 4 different buckets, if you will. One for alternative fuel diesel retrofit and outreach and other projects. Those applications receive 11% of the funding. Bicycle pedestrian receives 15%, and then traffic flow and transit projects each get 37% of the funds. There are also 3 MARC regional projects that get taken kind of off of the top. They don't compete again for funds. Those are just kind of taken off of the top of the funding amount at $927,000 on both sides of the state line. So you can see those 3 projects are the Air Quality Public Education Program, our rideshare program, and our active transportation program. You can see the 2-year programming targets available under CMAQ here on this slide. Next slide. The programming process that we use, we implemented this the last time we programmed funds in 2020. We do follow a 2-step process. Phase 1 has begun, and this is what we'll spend the bulk of our time today talking about. This is kind of our pre-application assessment. This is essentially a look at how a proposed project responds to kind of the policies and program direction that has been set through the Long Range Transportation Plan Connected KC 2050, as well as various other regional programs and policies. Once we get through that phase, and we'll talk a little more about schedule here in a minute. Once we get through that, we'll do more of a technical application, which is our phase 2 application. However, both phases are required for you to be considered. So if you are interested in submitting a project, please make sure that you submit a phase 1 application for it. Next slide. A little bit more on the programming timeline. Ron mentioned we had started phase 1 last week with our announcement of the call for projects. Obviously, we're here on March 10th doing our phase 1 pre-application workshop. Applications will be due on April 1st, Friday, April 1st. Then we'll go through a process as staff here to kind of go through an assessment of those projects, and then start working with our planning and policy committees to work through the assessments. And you can see a list of those planning and policy committees there off to the right, as well as kind of some tentative meeting dates for each of those committees for when they will start working on the assessments from their perspectives. We'll continue that work through May and June and wrap up phase 1 with a presentation to our Total Transportation Policy Committee at their meeting on June 21st. Next slide. And following that meeting on the 21st, we will move into phase 2, and we anticipate opening the second phase of the call for projects on June 23rd. With another technical, we'll do another workshop, that one geared at the technical application on June 30th. You have a little more time since there's a much more detailed part of the application process all the way to July 29th to complete your phase 2 applications. Staff will work through August and September, kind of evaluating those against the scoring criteria as adopted by our programming committees. In mid-December, the programming recommendations should be completed, and we'll wrap everything up with MARC board approval of the programming recommendations in late January of 2023. This is a very similar timeline to what we did back in 2020. Next slide. A quick note about the programming committees and which funds they'll be working with. Our Surface Transportation Block Grant Program funds are working. The programming committee assigned to them is our STP priorities committees. There is one for each Kansas and Missouri. CMAQ, as I mentioned, is broken out into different buckets. The alternative fuel diesel retrofit, outreach, and other projects are considered by the Air Quality Forum. Bicycle pedestrian is handled by the Active Transportation Programming Committee. Traffic flow, again, handled by our STP priorities committees. And transit will be handled through the Regional Transit Coordinating Council. And then the last of the funding programs, the Transportation Alternatives Program, gets run through our Active Transportation Programming Committee. Next slide. Some brief information that you may want to make sure you're aware of as we head into this. All of these programs are reimbursement programs. They're not grants. They are reimbursement programs. You will need to enter into a local public agency agreement with KDOT or MoDOT, and in some cases with the Federal Transit Administration. I would remind everyone that if you are working on a facility that is state-owned, you should be coordinating with your respective state agency and perhaps even securing letters of support from those state agencies for your projects. I think we have representatives from KDOT and MoDOT on the call now. If either of those entities would like to add kind of anything about the coordination with the state DOTs regarding local public agency projects, please feel free to do so, to unmute yourself and add to that information. Not sure if we'll get any takers on that or not, but important to make sure. The bottom line is it's important to make sure that you are coordinating with your state DOT if you are proposing to do work that involves a state right-of-way. Lastly, I want to talk about the MARC project fee. The MARC project fee is 1% of the federal funds awarded to your project. The fees are invoiced in the year in which they're programmed. So essentially in 2023, we'll be sending you an invoice, and those funds, those fees are payable in 2023. We use those non-federal dollars to match our federal planning funds. So we stretch those project fees into matching our federal planning funds and use them to do a variety of planning work throughout the region through our Unified Planning Work Program. Next slide. I think at this point I will turn it. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them. I don't know if there's any in the chat or not. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Martin to walk through a little more about the pre-application assessment process.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, and thanks to everyone for attending this workshop today. I look forward to seeing what the outcomes of this process will be. So I will be spending a few minutes talking about the pre-application process, and that we're going to be following over the next 3 months, 3 to 4 months or so. This is a process which was new. Last time we ran this process 2 years ago, so the last cycle of programming activity through MARC. We were very pleased with the results or the outcomes of the pre-application process. So we're going to be replicating this process this time around in 2022. So the pre-application process is going to be relying on the expertise of our planning and policy committees. It's likely that we have many members of those committees here on the call. So thank you very much for your participation. Really the goal that we are setting for ourselves with a pre-application process is try to find ways that the projects that are submitted and compete for these regional funds are in strong alignment with the vision and the goals and the strategies that are identified in our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Connect-KC 2050, and other policy documents that I'll be saying a few words about here in a few minutes. As a clear sort of objective of this pre-application process, we wanted to elevate the role of the planning policy committees by having their input early on in the process. This is a little bit different than what I used to do in the past. We also want to be able to reinforce conformance with the various policies that are included in our transportation plan. The slide here mentions conformance with the Congestion Management Process Policy. That is an important policy. There are many others as well, and I'll be saying a few more words about them here in a few minutes. We also want to be in a position that we can provide project enhancement tips and recommendations to project sponsors as a final outcome of this process as well. So we have a questionnaire that is out, and it's out for project sponsors to visit at this point, which will include it's a streamlined questionnaire. It's a little bit shorter than the full technical application that's out that will be out in the summer. We'll include some key scope and project description. Once the portal closes on April 1st, we are going to be conducting at the staff level an eligibility screening. We're going to be looking through those projects and finding out if these projects conform with the various policies that have been adopted by the Total Transportation Policy Committee, the TTPC, and our board of directors. Things like, for example, the Congestion Management Process Policy, our Major River Crossing Policy, policy, Complete Streets, Green Infrastructure Framework, our climate and clean air action plans, etc. Once the staff has conducted their assessment of the various projects, we are going to be releasing the results of that assessment to our planning modal committees in the form of a survey, and we're going to be asking for their concurrence or any comments or any perhaps disagreements with the way the staff has assessed these projects. We're going to be seeking project improvement recommendations and tips that can, and then we're going to be feeding that into committee discussions, and those will be happening in May and early June, leading up to the June 21st Total Transportation Policy Committee meeting. So as an outcome of this whole process, we are looking at ultimately putting all the projects that are submitted in response to this call for projects into these 3 buckets that are shown here on the screen. Projects will be found to be either in high alignment with a transportation plan with Connected KC 2050, or in alignment with a transportation plan, or not aligned with a transportation plan. And we will arrive at those findings by looking at whether or not they conform with the applicable policies that are described in our transportation plan. Another way of saying that is we'll be looking for projects not to be in violation of these various policies. We'll be also looking at to see if these projects that are submitted are included in Connected KC 2050 as financially constrained or illustrative projects, or whether they are listed and referenced as supporting programs in the plan. And I'll say a couple more words about that here in a little while. And last but not least, we will be looking to the degree to which these various projects advance strategies that are included in the plan itself. As I mentioned, we will also have sort of a set of recommendations for improvements or project enhancement tips from staff and from our members of our planning and policy committees, and they'll be packaged in a way that they can be shared with project sponsors once the full technical application opens later on in the summer. So with that, I wanted to talk about a number of regional policy considerations that we hope influence ultimately the projects that are submitted to compete for these regional funds. Through all of our regional planning work and through with involvement and input from stakeholders from across the region, we have identified a sort of a regional vision, regional goals, and strategies that we want to advance through our investments. So this programming process is guided in very large part by our transportation plan, as we mentioned already a few times today. And that is our Connected KC 2050, our long-range metropolitan transportation plan for the Kansas City region. This is a plan that it was adopted in June of 2020, establishes a vision for our transportation system. It develops policies and strategies for implementing this vision, and ultimately identifies regionally significant projects that correspond with the vision itself. To expand on the goals and strategies from our plan itself, it's organized with certain goals that we want to pursue and strategies that we'll be implementing to arrive at those goals. So the goals are things that we want, what we want, and the strategies we will follow will be the things we'll do to get there. So what do we want? We want access to opportunity, where we can have a supported, connected system that enables access to all activities. We want public health and safety, where we can foster healthy communities and healthy individuals by providing safe and secure places to walk, to bike, to ride the bus, to drive, with clean air to breathe. We want a healthy environment where we can prioritize and support investments that reduce pollution and also greenhouse gas emissions. And preserve and restore ecosystem health. We want to provide a range of transportation choices to allow for ease of travel, as well as public health and environmental benefits. And we want economic vitality, where we maintain a system that supports the efficient movement of goods and of people, and promotes economic development. So what are the types of things that we like to do? So we arrive at these goals. We'd like to focus on our centers and corridors, where we focus our energy and our investments around key activity centers and corridors, and the corridors that benefit them. We want to build resilience and reduce climate risk to our transportation system and our communities as well. while also ensuring that the transportation system's impact on the climate decrease over time. It's important. We want to consider new or additional funding streams as well. We want to be able to prioritize investments where we invest in projects that incorporate more than one strategy and benefit the largest amount of people possible. And we want to leverage data and technology as always, where we incorporate data-driven transportation planning into our plans and our various programs. So I'd like to say a few more words about some of these key policies that we hope are advanced through the projects that are submitted. One of the key policies that we have has been in place for a number of years is our Complete Streets policy. And this was also adopted by our Total Transportation Policy Committee and Board of Directors, and we are seeing some really good outcomes from this policy being in place. So this is a policy that supports a vision of a transportation system that meets the needs of all users, of all ages, of all abilities, for all modes, and yields a large number of benefits, as you can see here on the screen. Complete streets improve public safety, promote public health, provide economic benefits, enhance environmental quality as well, and ensure long-term savings. We also know that complete streets are green streets, and as such, they support the integration of green streets concept into those projects as well. So the Complete Streets policy that's been adopted by our boards is consistent with federal guidance. It indicates that all planned and program projects shall provide safe accommodations for all users and who have legal access to that roadway. The policy applies to all MARC planning activities that involve the use of the right-of-way and all activities that are conducted by MARC to program federal funds. The policy is sensitive to both current and future community context, and there are exceptions in the policy itself in cases where it may be difficult to implement the policy itself. I will say that in the years that this has been implemented, to my knowledge, the waivers of the Complete Streets policy have not been requested before the Total Transportation Policy Committee, and we are seeing some really good outcomes from this policy being in place. I'll move on now to our congestion management process policy, which was also updated or adopted by our board of directors in 2020, along with the approval of the transportation plan. This is a policy that calls for a systemic and a way of monitoring, measuring, and diagnosis the causes of congestion, evaluates and recommends strategies for managing this congestion in our system. The policy calls for a congestion mitigation analysis to be conducted prior to a single occupant vehicle roadway capacity project. The policy does say that if congestion currently exists in a corridor, then the project sponsor really should consider travel demand reduction and operational strategies as part of that project itself. And so what are those strategies? There are things like public transit, bicycle pedestrian infrastructure, express toll lanes, compact land use, et cetera. There's a much longer list of potential strategies in our congestion management toolbox. So if this analysis finds that the demand management and operational strategies by themselves cannot mitigate the congestion that exists currently on a facility, then single occupant vehicle capacity may be supplemented to the project. And finally, the travel demand and operational strategies must be incorporated into the project development with a commitment to implementation by the sponsor. So moving on a little bit now to another plan that was also recently adopted by our board of directors, the Climate Action Plan. This is early in 21. This is a plan that in many ways aligns very closely with a lot of the goals and objectives from our transportation plan overall. The key goals for this plan is to transform into a more resilient, equitable, and a healthy region, achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and adapt to the many risks that are posed by the climate change. The plan lists a large number of strategies that we can implement to reduce our risk, and they're the ones that you can see here on the left-hand side of the slide. The top three bullets here really include strategies that are related to our vehicle fleet, decreasing fossil fuel usage, increasing energy efficiency, and transition to electric vehicles. We also have strategies around calling for a decrease in the vehicle miles traveled, and hopefully increasing our multimodal usage. Much of this can be improved achieved by improving our stewardship and land use patterns around our key activity centers and corridors, particularly those that are served by our transit services. The plan also lists a number of strategies to adapt to impacts of climate change in our region. It calls for the conservation and restoration of green infrastructure, supporting healthy, active living, livable wage jobs, reduction of waste, and increase of demand for reused and recycled materials as well. This next slide goes into a little bit more depth about the specific strategies that are called out in our climate action plan, about things that we hope are incorporated into the various projects that are submitted for consideration into this process. I won't go through all of the ones that are listed here on the screen, and some of them start being a little bit duplicative from what you've seen in prior slides. But overall, reduction in vehicle miles traveled, more low and no emission vehicles in our system, shifting trips to affordable, equitable, and safe mobility options, and increasing the transportation system resilience. Another key plan that we have adopted has been in place for a number of years that also we hope is reflected in our investments is a Clean Air Action Plan, which has as a key goal to maintain health-based air quality standards for ground level ozone. Important strategy that we like to advance through the use of these funds. Again, the strategies that you see that we hope are reflected in some of the projects that are advanced are reduction of diesel emissions, promoting connectivity of pedestrian, bike, and transit facilities through mobility hubs. Also a key sort of concept or idea from our Smart Moves 3.0 transit vision for the Kansas City region, native and sustainable landscaping and green infrastructure, as we mentioned already, a transition to electric vehicles, traffic signal coordination, OGL, etc. I want to, before I move on to the next part of this presentation, I wanted to say a few more words on a couple of other key policy strategies as well. We have a green infrastructure framework that calls for the integration of nature-based solutions into projects in order to reduce heat islands, conserve air and water quality, and improve walkability. There's a large number of green infrastructure elements that we also hope that are implemented or considered into projects that are submitted into this process. Things like landscaping, stormwater BMPs, riparian restoration, ideally in ways that connects across watersheds and across transportation systems themselves. A couple more words on the green infrastructure framework. This is really meant to be a practical framework, and we hope that it influences the projects that are submitted in reasonable ways. This is an area that 2 years ago, we had a lot of partners that struggled a bit in answering these questions. We did find that after proper consideration, most projects that were submitted for consideration of funding through this process were able to include green infrastructure elements into those project scopes. And we would really like to see that happen again this time around. If you do have any questions on this specific policy, we do have Tom Jacobs that's on the call that will be available to answer any questions now or after this call. And then a few words about the major river crossing policy that also has been in place for a number of years. This is a policy that calls for safe, practical, and appropriate bike ped accommodations in the planning and design for all projects that cross the Kansas and the Missouri rivers. The policy also calls for those accommodations to be built whenever they are found to be warranted and feasible. So in closing for this section of the sort of the policy considerations that we hope are reflected into the projects, we really hope to see that whenever possible, you look at the scopes of the projects that you're considering submitting into this process to look for ways that some of these strategies can be embedded as part of those project scopes, and that in turn will make those projects more competitive. I only selected a few here to say a few words about. There's others as well, and those are found and linked and referenced in our transportation plan. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part of this report, which is review some of the helpful tips from our transportation plan, Connected Kansas 2050, some helpful information that we hope is helpful to you as you're putting together your applications. So here's an image of the project landing page in connectedkc.org. which is includes the information of our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Connecticut 2050. And once again, you'll find a lot of the information you need and hopefully reference as your applications are being written and being developed. I'll spend a few minutes on these key website special attention areas, and I'll show you where those are. These are questions that are included in the application portal as you're filling out your applications. I'll share where the project numbers can be found for projects that are in the MTP, or where to find information about whether a project is a supporting program or not. There's a large number of strategies that are included in the transportation plan. I'll kind of show you where those are as we move forward before I turn it over to the next speaker. So once again, here's a landing page for Connecticut 2050. And the first one of the first questions is your project in the transportation plan or not? So I'll be saying a few words about how to get there through this link. And then we also have a question about whether a project or a program is a supporting program in the plan itself. So for information on the projects in the menu bar, sort of at the top of the screen, click on that link. It'll take you to the projects page, and the same on the supporting programs. If you click on the projects link, it'll take you to the page here on the left, and on that page, there's a button there that says View Project List. You click on that, and it should take you to all of the projects that are included in our MTP. And those are categorized and organized in a number of different ways that hopefully they're easy to find for any project sponsor that's looking to find that information. If you are, for example, pursuing a project that's a roadway rehabilitation or reconstruction project that may not be included in the plan itself or mentioned in the plan itself, but it may very well be an asset management program. And I'll show you how to find that information so that you can include that response in the application portal. So on the right-hand side of the screen where you see the pull-down menu, what we want, 5 policy goal areas open up. And so I'll click on one of those, economic vitality. And as that page opens up, you see some supporting programs that are listed there on the side. So a roadway rehabilitation reconstruction project really kind of fits under the transportation asset management. So we'd like to ask you in that particular case to click that box. This is a project that advances asset management, and it is a supporting program in the plan. And there's other ones in there as well that invite all of you to look through. And certainly if you have any questions, let us know. The application portal also asks for which strategies are being advanced through a given project or program. So let's walk through where to find those where to find that information under how we'll get there page. Those are the strategies in the MTP. On the left-hand side, it lists 5 underlying or overarching strategies: centers and corridors, climate protection and resilience, and a number of different ones. So as an example, I'll click on the centers and corridor, and the page that's here on the left opens up, and there's information about the centers and corridor strategy. And if you find that your project is advancing this strategy, please go ahead and tell us, and we'll give you credit for that strategy. Also, under the how we'll get there page, there is another link for a list of additional strategies that above, in addition to the 5 underlying strategies, there's an additional 19 other strategies as well that can be referenced and cited in your applications. If you click on the list of all strategies button, and a page will open up with, as I mentioned, 19 additional strategies as shown here on the screen. So in this screen capture, I show some additional of these strategies. Air quality, completing green streets is another strategy, safety strategies, or system efficiency. Under each one of these, or under a majority of these, we have some links that are included that will take you to different pages that are included on the MARC webpage, or on the Connecticut website that gives you more information about that plan or that effort or that set of strategies if you need more information to be able to answer the question in the application portal. So complete streets information. If you have information about safety strategies that you're hoping to include in your projects, you will find that information here as well. Or congestion management policies. So as an example, I'll click on that one, congestion management policies. It'll take you to this page on the transportation website. and which includes resources, as many of our pages on the MARC website do. In this case, for example, you can take a look at the congestion management process policy that was recently approved by our board of directors a year and a half ago. This also includes a link to our congestion management toolbox, all the different ways that a project can include strategies in order to address existing congestion that may exist on a corridor. It also includes a link to our transportation congestion and reliability, which includes a set of maps about where congestion and unreliability exists currently in our system, in our congestion management network in the Kansas City region. This is my last slide, then I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker. As far as application resources, Mark Hansen already mentioned that, but we do have a large set of resources that are available to all project sponsors to help you fill out your applications. So you can find those in the main landing page, connectedkc.org/funding, right above the button where it says application portal, where you click on the portal, you start writing out your applications. Right above that, there is a link to view funding application resources. And it takes you to this page on the right-hand side with a large list of resources that are available, and hopefully will be helpful to you as you're filling out the application. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Chris Upchurch, who is going to be walking us through how to fill out the application portal. So thank you, Chris. It's all yours.
I believe that Chris is having connection issues at the moment.
Okay. We'll give him another couple seconds to see if he comes back. Otherwise, I'll be able to, I'm going to have to take his slides, move forward from there. Chris.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay.
All right.
I was just trying to mention that I believe we are going to make these slides available on the application website so that they can, folks can go back and look at that fire hose of information you just spouted and I am about to spout.
That is correct. We're going to have all these slides posted on the application website, and we're also going to be posting this recording as a YouTube clip, so people will be able to watch it afterwards as well. Correct.
All right. So getting into the application itself, next slide, please. It is linked from the application from the website there. You just click on the application portal link. Next slide. And the first thing you're going to have to do is register. And I believe even if you've registered for other calls for projects, you're going to have to go back in and register for this one. Next slide. Most of this should be pretty self-explanatory. I will note the one down towards the bottom where it says select the committees for which you're a voting member. If you're not on any of the MARC committees, but you are submitting a project for your jurisdiction, you can just skip that one. It's not a required question. But go ahead and fill in your contact information and create a password. Next slide. And then once you've done that, you can log in using your username and the password you just created. Next slide. So once you're logged in, the place to start is start new application. Once you've done that, then applications that you've started will appear here. You can have multiple applications ongoing at once if you have different projects for your jurisdiction that you're going to be submitting. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through every single element of the application, every single drop down and text box. That would be a little redundant to the stuff that Martin has just gone over. But I did want to hit a couple of the highlights sort of to demonstrate how the application works and things that might be a little tricky. After you get your application, after you name your project, you have to choose which type of agency you are, whether you're a city or county or some other jurisdiction that could submit these projects. And you'll be given a drop down where you can choose which of city, county, et cetera, you're associated with. I will note that that does default to whatever is first in the alphabetical list. You can just change that to your particular jurisdiction. You don't all have to work for Archie, Missouri to submit projects for this. Now you have to choose your primary project mode from among the choices listed there. Next slide. If your project has more than one mode, so for example, you've got primarily a road project, but it also involves some bike ped facilities, you can choose a secondary mode here. If you have more than two modes, just choose whichever of the secondary modes is most important and mention the details of your other modes that are involved in your project description. Next slide. So in addition to modes, we're asking about project type, and this is getting a bit more specific about what your project does within a particular mode. So you can see here for roadway and bridge projects, it can be everything from bridge rehabilitation to ITS improvements, roadway capacity, operations, etc. Now this list of specific project types is going to vary depending on your primary mode. So if you're at a loss for what your primary mode is, it may be helpful to look through the project types and figure out what most applies to your project. Next slide. You can see here the project types for bike, pedestrian, and bike ped projects. Next slide. We have our other projects, which is kind of the catch-all. Next slide. Also alternative, excuse me, next slide. And transit projects. Next slide. So as Martin mentioned, your project either has to be specifically listed in Connected KC 2050 or fall under one of the supporting programs. So if you are specifically listed, you need to get that 4-digit project number off the Connected KC website that Martin showed earlier, and this is where you enter that. Next slide. If you are not specifically listed in Connected KC 2050, you get this drop down, which lists all of our supporting programs. And it is important to note with this drop down and many of the subsequent ones, you can choose multiple entrants. So if you have more than one Connected KC supporting program that this falls under, feel free to click as many as apply. We will ask you to enter some narrative to talk about how you support those programs. But for, again, many of these, not just the programs, but also the strategies, the safety elements, you can select multiple things in the dropdown. Next slide. Now, I did want to particularly highlight that we have one fairly monstrous list of PSP projects. We've had a lot of these over the years, planning sustainable places or creating sustainable places. So there's a real long list of them. We do have it organized in chronological order there by year, but you'll have to go through and see which, if any, PSP or CSP projects are relevant to this particular application. And again, you can select more than one of these. Next slide. Once you get through the bulk of the questions talking about what your project is and how it fulfills the goals and strategies and needs of Connected KC 2050 and MARC's other policies, we finally get down to the project geography here. What we mean by does this project have a geography that can be mapped is does it apply to any particular subset of the region? That could be as big as an entire county or city, or could be as small as a single intersection or a roadway corridor. So if you select that it does have a geography that can be mapped, you'll get this nice looking map here. And you really have two options. One is geographic selection. This is what's appropriate for projects that may encompass an entire county or city. Next slide. So if you do that, just select county, city, or none. If you select county or city, you'll be given the chance to actually choose from among a list of MARC counties or MARC cities. We're not going to make you actually trace the outline of your city boundaries. Next slide. For projects that apply to anything other than a complete county or city or in the entire region, we're going to ask you to sort of draw in using the map tools for your particular project. And here we've got a set of drawing tools. You can draw freehand lines, draw squares, that sort of thing. Fairly basic set of tools. You can zoom in and out on the map to get the appropriate geographic area there. And we know this isn't going to be perfect, but please just give us as good an idea as possible about where this project is going to be. Next slide. Finally, the very important set of buttons down here. You can save your application and come back and work on it later, but do make sure you use the save button. You also need to submit your application once you're finished. If you just hit save and never submit it, it's not going to go any further in the process. So once you get to the end point, submit is very important. Please make sure you do that before our April 1st deadline. And finally, perhaps the most important button here, next slide, report issue. If you have any problems, that includes both technical issues with the application portal, any conceptual questions about how you're supposed to answer particular questions, how these things apply to your project, hit the report issue button. You do that, you'll have an email that will go to Paul Bouchard, who I see is active in the chat already answering some questions. He and Sarah Hintz will handle sort of the more technical issues with the application. If you have more conceptual ones, I'll be handling those. And if I can't get your answer, I have a bunch of our subject matter experts here at MARC, many of whom are also on this call, that I can refer you to who will ultimately be the ones sort of evaluating your application on those particular questions, so we can make sure you get the answer that's going to let your project put its best foot forward. Next slide. And speaking of those, here is a nice list of people you can contact beyond just that report issue button.
So thanks, Chris. This, I think, is the last slide in our deck today. Did want to highlight that there are a number of MARC staff that are eager and willing to help with the questions about the process as you go through it. I see that Jackie White had a question about the application portal itself in the chat. If folks on the call now have any questions about any of the information we've presented this afternoon, we'd be happy to spend time answering those. If you want to enter those in the chat, that's great. If you want to unmute your microphone and ask the question in front of the group, that's good as well. So I'll now make that opportunity available for folks on the call. Happy to try and answer any questions about the information that we've presented today. And Martin may have already answered the most important question about whether we will be posting these materials, and in fact we will. We'll make this available. If you've got colleagues that need to see it that weren't able to participate today, they can have the pleasure of watching the video again or accessing the slide deck itself, and of course all the information that we've presented is available on the project website. Since I'm not seeing any hands raised or questions in the chat, I'd open it back up. Mark, Martin, Chris, anyone else on the list here, if you've got any additional information you'd like to share today. Otherwise, we can let folks on about the rest of their afternoon.
I do not have anything else to share at this point. Thank you.
So Eric Rogers put a question in the chat about if there is a Word document or a version of the application form that'll be available for folks to use as a reference as they're completing their applications.
There is. We have added a PDF form of the entire questionnaire, and that can be found in the resources page. Yes. And Eric, if you're not able to see that, just let me know, and I'll include a link. But it should be in the resources page, which you can get to through the link that was right above the application portal.
And along the same lines there, sorry, Martin, the character limit that's within the application might differ a bit from the character limit that you see within Microsoft Word. Word doesn't count certain things like spaces or some new lines and everything. So if it doesn't match exactly, we just might have to work through it. But if it's substantial and you want to talk about it, again, use that report issue button.
Any other questions? Well, once again, thank you all for your time this afternoon. I wish you all the best of luck in filling out your applications and working with us through this process this year. We look forward to a great crop of projects to fund at the end of the calendar year, and we're available for any questions as you get started in your applications. So thanks to the staff on the call today, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon.